You know the way, oh, faster my. All day long I was practicing that, and I had faster me. I thought that was the way it was. So my apologies if I can't speak. Even though I do understand, because of my Irish, I do understand a lot. But find myself inadequate when it comes to talking it, maybe, and maybe I should change. It reminds me, actually, coming here tonight, I was going to start exactly at 7:30. I used to tell my students always that, one of my fundamental rules was starting a lecture at exactly the time, even if there was nobody present. I've never had the courage to try that. Like if nobody's present. Now, this isn't me, but I will say what a former lecturer in UCD used to say, that you didn't actually need students to give a lecture. That a lecture was a great mind speaking to itself. So that students, if students were there, that was fine, but you didn't need them in order to talk to yourself. So hopefully I won't be talking to myself tonight. I have 35 minutes. I'll be dragged off the stage at 40, and I have only 10 or 12 slides. In one sense, I hate PowerPoint, but because hopefully there's a team going through this, which I somebody described the way I give talks one time as sort of going up a tree and out the branches and down leaves, but I actually do always come back to the main branch and then sort of go right up to the top or down to the bottom. But so hopefully this isn't a lecture in the formal sense. My style is one of discussion and sort of interaction, etc. So I'm far more comfortable with that. So I'm honoured to be even told that I was giving a lecture. But in 35 minutes, hopefully you'll understand what Adrian has been saying about kind of my own work, which is based, I actually started off umpteen years ago as an engineer. My PhD was in finance in the States, and I taught in various universities. And I actually set up a degree in Irish in Dublin City University exactly 21 years ago when I was, as I told people, I peaked then. It's been downhill since then. So, and I've been in various other universities since, and have written a number of books, one in Irish, but these ones were in English with an American co-author. And while the focus of these books was on Ireland, because they're about the link between language, identity, innovation, creativity, etc., I think there are broader implications, which hopefully, while I will be talking a lot about Ireland maybe, I try not to talk too much about it. God knows I talk too much about it, even though I don't listen to the radio or watch TV anymore because I find it too annoying. So, but hopefully you'll see things that you'll say, that's kind of useful. The most important standard or the most important measure of whether this has been any use or not is that you say it was better than sitting at home drinking wine or whatever people do. Now, I hope I got this button right. I'm afraid to touch the button, Adrian, even though, as I said, grand. So let me start off by I've divided this little chat into three parts. One is kind of talking about, because I'm sort of I still teach global financial markets and teach people, who trade money, etc., even though my concentration is now on green business, is the other module I teach on a master's program. I'll start off by talking about how I see markets and value as what's happening and what will happen more and more in the future. A lot of what I'm talking about hasn't quite arrived yet, and I'll probably be in my grave by the time it actually happens. But when I'm in my grave, I say this to people like yourselves, many of you, most of which are younger than myself. I say to them, you'll say Bradley was right after all. He may be in his grave, but he was right about some of the things he said. So some of the things are about an emerging age of where value is, where the economies, where the Isle of Man, for example, if I had power or I was sort of in charge of things, I would position. So in many ways, it's about economy and etc. So that's the first part. The middle part then is focusing on the title of my talk about authenticity and place and the role of place-based enterprise. So sort of narrowing it down to the more specific. I'll give some examples from Ireland and from outside Ireland. And then I'll finish up by looking at what is, I give myself the title now of educator. I think it's actually the most valuable title you can give somebody. I cringe when I'm identified as an economist, because in most of the economics department that I was in over the years, I had many battles about what that a lot of what is taught in economics departments, I think, is way out of date, and that they should be teaching far more about helping students to do some of the things we're talking about. I'll be talking about tonight, so that out of it emerges the sort of economic thinking that I think is appropriate for the 21st century. So let's start off. I threw some pictures up here of, hopefully you understand what all of them are. The first one is meant to be food. And what I was really trying to point out is that what's happening more and more to anybody who studies markets is that more and more the value is in the intangible, in the thing that is not quantifiable, that is very difficult to actually put a number on it. And that's why I myself have sort of reinvented myself and moved away from finance. I used to find it frustrating teaching dealers and fund managers and people who manage money, that you would be teaching them the value of something based on some formula that was in a way technically difficult or looked complicated because there was math in it. But in fact, underneath it all, I think it was too narrow a way of looking at where value is and what's happening. If you take food, for example, it's obvious to anybody, and again, I hope I'm not saying anything inappropriate here about, there are people who are struggling and find it very difficult to live on their resources. But in most of the sort of advanced countries, the Western world, etc., people no longer eat to survive, to live. The meaning of the food is really important. So how the animals were raised, where the animals came from, where the little business was, etc. That's important. People are eating, if you will, meaning. Or I was going to title this "Making Meaning." That if the modern manufacturing area is not about the physical making, it's almost the making of meaning, making sense to people. And one of my little slides that will come up later, I compare making making meaning versus making stuff, or making sense rather than making stuff. So food, for example, the value more and more is not in, as I said, the physical. And you see the same with craft. I'm sure the people here know far more about craft. I do work at the moment for the Crafts Council in Ireland and the Arts Council, and I find when I meet artists and crafts, it's obvious that it's the uniqueness or the distinctiveness, or again, where it came from, who made it. Like one cup is not the same as another. That picture over in the right, in case for all modern people who are into Facebook and things that I don't understand, is about social media. Again, you see the same thing. Why do people put their photographs up? Or why? It's because they trust. It's all about something that, again, you can't put your finger on. You can't touch it. It's something to do with something deep inside us all. Music, the value in tradition. I'm coming to an island where people understand the value of tradition in music. That, who's linked to this. And down the bottom, it's digital media, and this fashion is another example. Again, so what I'm really trying to capture is that making meaning is where more and more the value is. And I'm no guru, so I always like to get evidence of my argument. And here was something that the Irish Food Board, or Board BIA, sort of put out not too long ago. They did consumer trends, and you can see from this, a lot of the words that I sort of am trying to get across, I picked out with my little arrows, that keeping it real, the word authentic, being authentic, being true to yourself, or being truthful, doing something that actually is correct and real. And you see that real, authentic, and I won't read it all, but provenance and sourcing needs to deliver unique or distinctive product attributes, or celebrating tradition, again, this sense, I said it a few minutes ago, embracing the seasons, a passion for the place, all the kind of characteristics. They're things that I can't quite put my finger on, but they're all to do with, I like to use the word, the spirit. They're to do with the thing that we all have, but deep inside us. And a lot of the people, certainly in Ireland, they talk about, we need to do things for the Chinese market, and the great opportunities in China. And no doubt about it, but what is obvious to anybody who studies China is that China has grown so fast over the last decade or two that, a lot of what's happening in China, they're losing so much of what has made it special or unique or distinctive. And the Chinese, you see from this quote from the New York Times, it's cut out at the bottom there from a couple of, the Chinese have a desperate need of the past. They want to go back to root something that is authentic, And again, because a lot of the times, again, using food as an example, they can't trust a lot of the stuff, that is. So this idea of how does that come about? And again, sort of because of my, economics background and those battles I talked about in the universities, I used to say constantly to people, in my colleagues, you know, anybody who's done economics, they talk about supply and demand curves and all this. I think all that stuff is kind of from a different age, what I'm calling here in this slide, the industrial age. Most things now you can't even talk that way. You know, they emerge from some sort of, oftentimes it's magic. Why do certain companies succeed and why do certain products succeed? Oftentimes it's nothing to do with the kind of the simplistic way we've oftentimes, a lot of policymakers still think in that physical terms, even though they use fancy words like knowledge economy or the creative economy, or, you know, we need to be out there at the coalface of creating, we need to pour money into research and science. Nothing wrong with that, but a lot of it is founded, I believe, and again, not because of me, but because of other people's research, it is based on, they use the fancy words, but they're actually thinking in an old way. And God knows for myself, has such a great love of tradition, I love to be able to say to people, you know, that's an old way of thinking, you know, because they accuse me a lot of times of thinking in the past. I'm sure people here are involved in the language. I certainly found it when I ran a degree in Irish. You know, people think you're keeping something back. And I used to disarm a lot of them when I used to go around to high schools or secondary schools getting students 20 years ago. You know, students would say, you know, that would be great if we could do it. You know, that's a great degree, was finance, computing, languages of various sorts. If we could do it in Chinese or Spanish, it'd be useful. And I used to say to them, I used to say to their parents as well, you know, yeah, but sure, that's an old way of thinking, you know. I mean, sure, I could do it in Japanese or Spanish, but sure, that's about something about being useful. But if you know anything about what's going on, usefulness is not actually that useful. As you see that it's actually far smarter to believe in something, to stand for something, to have a sense of something. So you see, I'm not going to go through these words. I just wanted to contrast this, what I'm calling the industrial economy, the economy of the factory. And that still our education is based a lot on that, on sort of the boss, the teacher like myself or the professor or whatever, knowing all the answers and knowing everything, and therefore I sort of give it to my poor students who kind of absorb it, and then they become like me eventually, and they'll know something. When I kind of think that, as I explained in the last part of my talk about education, I think it's wrong. It's wrong. We all know, younger people in particular, know that a lot of that kind of knowledge is on the internet. It's on the, you know, you can look up that. If all I'm giving is facts or theories, students will get those on the internet. What really you can't give is something that's not on the internet, something inside ourselves. I'm using a general term for the spirit of some sort. So I think education more and more, as when I move to the right-hand side, is about something that is not given to students. You don't educate students. What you do is the student has the resource. He or she has it, and our job as educators is to draw it out, to bring it out, to help that person reach their potential so that it emerges from the milieu or the environment you as an educator creates. Because the student then, with all these resources, with the iPads and iPods and whatever, if they get meaning from you, if they're helped to discover a sense or a purpose or a mission or meaning in their own lives, they will themselves become what we really set out to do. So I think this left-hand side, which you can say I said earlier about making stuff or growing or consuming, it's like a machine. The economy is seen as some sort of machine. You plug in something, interest rates or whatever, and something happens, and you know, and you grow, and you know, you have rules. And God knows I don't know about yourselves, but I'm constantly ticking boxes, and people evaluate everything now. But I'm still an old fuddy. I reject a lot of that. I find out how, when I used to run degrees at one stage, I didn't believe in all that stuff. I used to say, I know how the lectures are. I'd ask the students. I'd ask them, how's it going? How's the class going? And I'd know from the students' reaction whether they were getting something out of it. I didn't need to tick boxes. I didn't need to do surveys a lot of times. So you can see there it's about quantity, mass production, a manufacture, a logic, if you will. You know, and it's not that the world has moved completely to the right side, but the trend is kind of, you can see on the right-hand side, I use the word sustain or experience sort of paradigm. It's about, you see the fuzziness on the right-hand side of our relationships and, you know, authenticity, empowerment, a living organism rather than a machine. It's some sort of grows in some way, and that everything is interconnected. and something comes out and emerges from this world that you create. You have no idea what it is, you can't control it, but if you can create the right conditions, out of it comes magic. And the magic is the creative economy, and that's why, as we see, culture is so central to it. The thing that seems to be of no or little value oftentimes is actually the most valuable thing, because the resource, I mean, the way I see a resource is not something, again, physical or something that's in the ground. An old way would be to see it as the most valuable resource is something you can touch, like land or oil or something. The most valuable resource becomes, you see down at the bottom I put, the old way is learning about something. The new way, if you will, the way of the future is learning to be, to become, making sense, making meaning. Meaning is the new money. I used to say at one stage, somebody attacked me and said, I thought we were getting away from that way of talking about money, but in a way, it's about value. And I'm constantly, because of my background, that clash between how the market measures value and how the market can't measure value is a source of great, I think it's in that interface between those two that the magic happens. So I'm trying to, again, because I'm constantly trying to show that I'm not making this stuff up, that this stuff is actually very, especially when I talk to business people, because they think, oh, this he's got some sort of agenda and he's going to try to convince us, but I know I'm a hard-nosed business person. So I usually like to produce things like the Harvard Business Review or a book from Harvard here, from goodness knows 1999, you know. And I'm showing here, I mean, again, I won't go through, but if you look at the title, it shows about how over the hundreds of years economies have changed, or the focus has changed. And again, there's a lot of overlap, but it's about the trend. And you can see that at the top, you know, just take the economic offering was a physical thing, a commodity of some sort, or we kind of specialized them a bit into goods. And then now people talk about services as, you know, a service economy. But in fact, it's experiences is the big thing of the future. Like, again, to do with feelings. You know, hey, what do I feel? You know, am I prepared to pay money because I feel? It's like, when you think of it, it is about something really deep. And it's where the language oftentimes, I think, all our languages, Irish, Manx, etc., where I think we probably haven't put enough emphasis on, there is a technical aspect about being able to speak, being correct, but there's also my angle, if you will, which is the thing about meaning, and meaning something because you're prepared to sacrifice, if you will. And if you look at some of the others, I'll just pick out, look at the last one, factors of demand. Like, it was characteristics, features, and one benefits. Now it's sensations, or it's like almost drama. I know I wrote an article on a drama publication one time, and I saw how similar innovation, ran innovation programs, and I saw that what people do on the stage and the experience one has as an individual watching a performance is very similar to what you try and nurture when you're trying to nurture an innovative environment or a creative environment. So you can see that the seller is sort of staging a performance of some sort. So it's about experience. And in order to bolster this, because one of my students became, as you can see, he's chief exec, former student who did a degree in Irish, actually. This was one of my earlier students. I was actually chairman of that company. It's now on the stock exchange, on the London and Dublin Stock Exchange. But I happened to be reading, because I still have some shares in the company, I happened to be reading last week some annual report from last year or whatever, and I saw this quote and I thought, oh, it's perfect. You can see, I didn't prompt him, and he never heard this from me when I was teaching him, but you can see that these days that he's talking about technology, but look at the progress. You know, technology used to be about, if you will, the technical. Now it's the experience. Now he was talking about something else, but again, this word is cropping up more and more, the idea of where is the feeling or the experience or the sensation. So, and then because I'm trying to show how relevant, the great hero of so many people, because they have some Apples and love their iPods and love talking. They used to love talking about Steve Jobs far more than they do now, because Apple, since he passed away, hasn't probably been as successful, but maybe that has to do with what I'm talking about now. But look at that quote there. When he died, the New York Times was saying he really wasn't a technologist. He was really a cultural leader. He understood culture, and he understood these things, again, far better than me, and that's why he was so wealthy and made such a difference. But you can see, again, some of the words down here about Apple, when you look up the Apple website, certainly when he was alive, it didn't talk about computery things and technology and how wonderful. It talked about experiences and about people, why they buy computers, or why they should like computers, or why computers mattered in their lives, or what he was trying to achieve. It was about this thing of freedom and a whole bunch. And if I may be presumptuous, I took a page from the Chronicles of Man, the front page, and blew it up from the website, and I took something from the museum here, and I showed that if you went to Irish business people, or if I again can jump a bit by saying, I'm sure business people over here, and you said, look, students sometimes might be better off by sort of studying something like this in order to be successful. They'd think you were crazy. But if you look at Steve Jobs' background, what did he do? He quit college, Stanford or whatever, and started studying Chinese calligraphy because he understood. He understood very well that understanding style and typefaces and type like this. I know it's in Latin. I wish I could have picked an example of, but it was actually very valuable because it helped to nurture the thing we're talking about, or I'm talking about. So I think it's actually, you see the connection that I'm now trying to make in this talk. And in a way, what I've spent the best years of my life writing about in these books and teaching, I try to capture in one slide what is, I think, a common thing to us in this room when we talk about identity and innovation. I prefer the word ingenuity rather than creativity, because I think it is about implementing. I used to tell people at one stage that I had all the world's problems solved in pubs late at night, because I have creative thoughts, but sure, it is easy to solve the world's problems in pubs late at night because you can be creative in a pub. You don't have to do anything about it. You can just talk about it. So I think innovation, the difference in innovation and creativity is in innovation you have to actually create value by doing something, by actually implementing something, and ingenuity, I think, shows more that action. So what I'm really arguing is that the spirit of a place, and this is central to the talk tonight, the spirit of a place, I mean, the French word or the Latin word, or even the old Irish word, the lore of place names, and I'm sure you have the equivalent here, so I, again, didn't want to step over my boundary and screw up, but the lore of a place name. I think students should learn a hell of a lot more about their own places they live in, because it's that, and the derivation, it gives them the resource I'm talking about, the meaning which is the centerpiece of that resource. So the spirit of a place, the thing that generates this meaning that I'm talking about. You see what I'm saying, that place I define as a sort of a meaningful location, a place that has meaning for you. And it's because, and the reason I'm saying it's so valuable is that as I said, I teach global financial markets. It's obvious that we're in a globalized world. Everything is sort of, the internet and people movements and capital movements and all that sort of stuff means that you can no longer kind of think about, in a sense, a place being independent of the world. And the real skill, I think, and the real opportunity, it's a challenge, but it's an incredible opportunity for this island, is if you can generate a global sense of place, a sense that you are not better than anybody else, you're part of a world that's all interconnected in various ways, but that you're different and distinctive and special because you're in a place. And that's not a narrow sort of a thing to do with religion or your own ethnic background, or it includes newcomers, people who have now made this at home because this is their place. Everybody's sharing this place that has meaning, and understanding the place, and understanding where people are sharing and how they're sharing, not only with other humans but with other non-human forms, is actually the great opportunity for places, and special places, distinctive places. You can see I put in there a whole bunch of things. What comes out if you do that properly means that you do create the thing. I took some examples. I didn't think I'd ever quote Peter Mandelson. I never really thought I'd quote Peter Mandelson. I certainly wouldn't have quoted him in his former job or whatever former jobs, but he was actually EU commissioner, if you remember, during a period, and he was in charge of I think competition or something in the EU, and he said this about Italian furniture at one stage at a speech he gave in 2007. That you can make sort of furniture, but Italian furniture was special, And I picked some examples. I'm not going to go through these. Some of them I can't actually argue are authentic. If I had another half hour, I'd argue Kerrygold sells authenticity, but is it authentic? Is it true to itself? Is it being truthful? It sells in Ireland. When you see, I was in Germany at one stage, they were showing one. I couldn't recognise this country they were showing Kerrygold. So some of them you know, are not. But the one that strikes me and the one that I think there's so many lessons is the GA. I've said to the Gaelic Athletics Association, Croke Park is a place. Anybody who's been there knows that it represents something special, it has meaning. It's because of that thing I'm talking about tonight. Or even the GA. I mean, it's probably, I said to these policymakers that you'd be far better off in Ireland studying the GA and where it came from and how it's rooted in community and place, and how it's at the same, while it's modern, it's also rooted in the past. It's global. God knows it's done a few things recently and deals with Sky that maybe, you know, aren't quite what I would think is right. But they've kind of been able to sort of evolve from the Celtic revival period of 1883 and then come on 84, it says there, and become sort of competing against global sports like soccer and rugby, and yet at the same time be probably the most popular. I picked this example from Ireland. An example of a company, again, I have a link of some sort. Some of my former students sort of run a restaurant part down at the bottom from it. And then there's a knitwear company at the top called Inishmaan. It's on the Aran Islands. And you can see what they're selling is kind of this thing I'm talking about. They sell these sweaters for really high prices. I couldn't afford them. I couldn't even afford to go to the restaurant. Well, I couldn't afford to stay in this hotel, even though the students were, they said because I was their former teacher, etc., they do a special deal. It'll be only €400 for the weekend. And I told them, actually, I would love to stay, but you know what I just remembered? There's an old woman living in the island and has great Irish, and I would love to stay with her instead. And it was wonderful. And it only cost €30 a night or something. But you can see that the Financial Times, again, this issue of, I mean, what they're selling, these are some of the ads, like the old ad of this little guy standing on the quayside, a sort of a confident look, but the sweater he's wearing, that's an ad they use, and these sweaters are sold in Milano and Saks Fifth Avenue and fancy boutiques around the world. And the modern one, what they're doing is they're selling this place, they're selling, as I said, authenticity, or selling this link with the past. And again, by the way, I'm not even going to refer to the bottom row because you'll attack me, because you all know what's on the bottom row. I only wanted to throw them out, not that I'm selling anything. I'm throwing them out because I went on the internet and I said, well, I need to pick some Manx examples of companies. I let you do your own thinking on whether some of these, you know, in terms of drink and in terms of, again, sweaters and in terms of cheeses, a lot of them have but the one on the right is to do with what I thought was interesting how, because I teach green stuff now, it's interesting how the windmills had this shape. Maybe they don't exist in reality, maybe it's an artist. Yeah, it sort of gets rid of a lot of the problems that but look at these two examples I picked here. I figured I was safer on sort of other ground. So the #1 restaurant this year in the world, or last year, whatever, with Noma in Copenhagen, you can see that, again, the food, it's selling something about the past, rooted in the past. Look at the phrase, and then going into the future. So it's not about keeping something back, it's about talking about the future. Or this company in Provence, talking again about sort of authenticity, etc., and they have 1,000 stores around the world. What are they actually selling? They're selling, I don't actually understand it, something to do with your face, and I know I see the stores. I went in there one time to buy a Christmas present for somebody, and I ran out because it was so expensive, but I knew it looked great, and they do. But look, and so let's look then to my final thing, and I will wrap up in a few minutes, is that when you look at what we have then, and this is really the link with language, and specifically Manx in this case, but I would have used the same diagram for Ireland. I could talk for hours on this diagram because it's in a way in my education philosophy that I've talked a little bit up till now. But if you look at what I'm really saying in this diagram, I mean, I've argued that meaning is the key, that is the resource, that is the valuable thing, that is the holy grail. I see it. I've done some work in Google and financial services companies, Intel. I set up an institute once with them. They got rid of me after a while because I wanted to be a bit too radical. The president of the university had no relationship with Intel until and then I got dumped out of the position because I was going to cause Intel problems, and he said to me, I hope this isn't on TV. I think it is. I don't care. He said, I think, you know, and of course the people in Intel, when I left and went to another university, told me afterwards, hey, actually, you were the only one in the university who we could do business. You understood we're a $1 billion company, and this was a small university in Maynooth. And yet I was trying to sort of get from Intel what I think Intel should give, and the university could do what it could do. But you needed to be very radical in your education. I was supposed to be heading up a business school based on the philosophy here. They decided it was too radical, and they went for what I thought was the old boring business school. I didn't even want a business school. I thought a university should be about what I've up here, interdisciplinarity, the arts combined with the sciences, that setting up something special in business means that you oftentimes get distance. But if you look at what I'm talking about, a lot of policymakers, and I'm sure in this country a lot of them talk the language of, as I said earlier, science and technology. But they're oftentimes down what I think is on the bottom. If you look at the simple diagram here of, they're talking about knowledge, but they're really talking about information and about the internet and about data, oftentimes, which is even more further down the bottom. There's science and technology, which is needed. But the magic is actually, the reason why you would develop a learning economy, which is about, anybody who studies education and understands what I'm talking about when I talk about education, the essence of education is, I said earlier, it's transforming. It's not about, again, giving students sort of facts or figures. It's about helping them to become what they should become, not because I want to, but because they become, because of the environment you create. And so science and technology is, in the modern economy, very important. But the real opportunity is to combine it with the things I've been talking about today. So that, for example, I was trying to show that, that down here is sort of rationality, logic, all the sort of things. But really, unless they're combined with the soul and creativity and the emotions, you won't actually move up to where the real value is. The real value is when you have the two, when you have those two in some way dancing together. And so I was trying to show that if you're going to become a society, an economy that is transformed, that is going to be a learning one or a knowledge one or creative one, or the way people talk, culture-based creativity. If you're going to, then a multilingual milieu is actually incredibly valuable, because what it does is, especially a minority language or a language that is, English is so powerful and so dominant that if you combine those two, if you combine, not because you're doing it in a sort of a sense, because you're doing it in, how will I say this, in the usefulness of it. You're doing it because you know that if you have students or you have an environment where the people are in the world where they're constantly having to in some way dance between those two, the global and the local, they're able to look out and look in. They're able to, in a sense, it goes back to my own background, to do with the marketplace that is outside the individual, that is outside. I have no control over prices. When you're unless you control them illegally, you don't really have control over prices. So it's when you teach people economics or finance or whatever I've taught, you're teaching them about something outside themselves, about how the world is outside. But inside each individual is a value's subjective, that's individual, that's about them. And it's how they handle this outside and themselves that is really the essence of what I'm trying to talk about. So that a multilingual milieu where you have one that's almost too marginal and the other one that is too dominant is actually powerful in so many. But it's powerful also because of something that I find very difficult to describe. I'm almost at the finish, Adrian, now. But it's hard to describe because it's actually, it's the thing to do with what is actually at the back of all of the thing, which is almost heresy for people who have, as I have, grown up in economics departments and taught this kind of stuff, economics and finance, for umpteen years. It's like what's taken as given by and large is that when you're trying to develop a business, what you sort of set up is this, and education is founded on a lot of this, is you find something that's useful and somebody wants, and you try and sell loads of those things to the person, and you market it and you promote it and you grow. Now, I'm not saying that doesn't work. It does. There's loads of, but in the emerging age, if you believe anything of what I'm talking about, it's actually back to front. You don't start that way. You don't kind of even think that way. What you start with is, what's the purpose here? What's the reason I exist? What's the meaning here? Why am I doing this? What's my mission? What do I stand for? Go back to the Apple example. And you don't do something because it's useful. You do something because it's right. You do the right thing. It's to do with what I called earlier the link between identity, integrity, and ingenuity. The reason why, for example, Manx is so valuable, in many ways I found this when I argued about the arts. Is that the big mistake oftentimes people make who are promoting the language is that they say things like, let's show how valuable it is to policymakers, or let's show why they should be promoting it because it may lead to the following. I'm not saying it doesn't, and it does, and I'm not attacking those people who show the value of Manx, for example, to policymakers in order to get support, because God knows you do need support. But I actually think in the new age, in the world I've been describing here tonight, it's almost, that the reason why people should do something is because it's the right thing to do. It's the responsible thing to do. If you do the right thing, the organizations, the countries like this that will succeed, the companies, whatever, will be the ones that are the responsible one. In the new capitalism, the old way, it isn't dead yet, as we saw. I thought it was going to die after the recent recession, but it's still lingering on. But in the emerging age of climate change and global, all these, I think the organization, and it's not just me, Michael Porter, another great guru of Harvard, shows that it is actually the organizations that stand for something in a community, that are there for the good of society, that people will trust them. They trust them because they know they're not out to make money out of them, in a sense. And because they're not out to make money, they will buy their goods and services because they know they can trust them. And they're the organizations or companies that will do the best, because they're the ones that actually stand for something. Now, in a sense, if I had one advice for policymakers here, is stand for something, believe in something, spend money on things that don't look like they're that useful. And I hope I'm not being crude by using terms, but I think you know what I'm saying. But you're doing it because it's the right thing to do. It's the right thing to do as a human being. It's the right thing to do for humanity. It's the right thing to do, not just for the past, but for the future. But it means that what you do is you create an ethos and a society and an economy that is incredibly successful, because people around the world will buy things from people who believe in something. It's when you don't believe in something, when you stand for making bucks. God knows I could tell you enough stories from Ireland, so I'm not going to say Ireland is an example, but there are good examples around the world. Perhaps I've taught a bit in Finland, and I know Denmark and Scandinavian countries, and some of your own roots. I mean, again, I could go on about the Viking heritage and the Celtic heritage of Manon, but I mean, in May, you're in probably a better position than any other country in the world to do a lot of what I'm talking about tonight, which is sort of this world of dancing, as I said, between. And only this week, show how current I am. Fortune magazine, I'm finishing off with this, or one just to wrap up. And again, it's not that I'm not going back on what I said about skills and that, but I just want to show evidence of what's happening. Engineers, which everybody says the world needs engineers and God knows what. And I see it because I teach a class at the moment, finance for engineers, and they could do with some empathy, as you can see here. It says, but look what it said in this article about jobs of the future. And it's talking about, emotional bonds, words I've been using or should have been using tonight, making judgments, skills in the highest demand, relationships, co-create, cultural sensitive, managing diverse, then going down here in a way that has not been true before. The central issue for the economy, if all of us who work in it will be the answer, what will people do better than computers? Computers can do so much now, but they can't fix your plumbing. They can't do, a lot of things that human beings can do and will never be able to do. They don't understand the heart and the spirit and all the things that are at the heart of what I've hopefully been talking about tonight. So the great opportunities to do things are not to have students come out of education where it's not that they don't need skills, they do need certain things. I mean, they do need to be able to do certain things. Don't get me wrong, I'm not airy-fairy, I'm actually very practical. But what I'm saying is, ease up on skills. It's not as important as people make out. Anybody who hangs out with the Googles of this world knows what they far more believe in. And would love are people who believe in things, who are a bit strange, who would probably leave and set up their own companies, or in fact, they don't have any intention of joining a big company. They want to set up a company of their own. But hey, they're so odd and strange and full of creativity that, hey, we should get them in here, because going back to what I said, and I'll finish off with this, the old factory model was the boss, as I said, was in charge and knew, and he or she did, usually he did all the thinking. Now what you want to do is create a spirit or an environment, a milieu, where the person does it because it means something to them, and out of it comes that thing I've talked about. So that language, and this is how I am finishing, language is, especially as I said here, I hope I'm not flogging that point too much. So I finished off with what I think again is there's so much emphasis on the head and science, and again, it's not that I'm saying it's not, but what about the hand, and what about the heart, and what about imagination? And it's the creativity comes when you have all of those in some way, in some sort of sync or balance. And all the things, and I'm not reading out this because Adrian knows this by heart and I only stole it from your website, but I think it's in Culture Vannin. I think it is what it stands for. All of these things that I'm talking about are at the heart, I believe, of your organisation. And I am deeply honoured that I got the opportunity. I will now answer any questions. Gura Mai Ed, which is in Gura Margaret.